My name is Jason Scott Montoya, and we're going to talk about how you can work effectively with freelancers, or if you're a freelancer, I'm going to talk about some systems and ideas that can help you effectively work with your clients. So I own a marketing company. We hired freelancers for our internal purposes, but also to help fulfill some of the services we sold to our client. I really got to understand what it was like to be the company hiring the freelancer. Now I've become the freelancer, and then I started to build these teams. I've got a 300 degrees perspective on the different roles and how they work and the different tensions. I've come up with some really good ideas and systems that have helped me flourish and helped a lot of my clients flourish when it comes to working well with freelancers. There's 4 areas that we're going to dive into. That first area is understanding our intentions. So why are we doing what we're doing? The second area we want to address is how we're going to structure the engagement. The third area is how we're actually going to manage the projects that we're working on. And those 3 areas are going to lay a foundation for what's ultimately the 4th area, which is a sweet spot engagement. I'm Jason Scott Montoya. Thank you for taking time to watch this. So let's get at it. Hey, my name is Jason Scott Montoya, and today we're going to talk about how you can work effectively with freelancers, or if you're a freelancer, I'm going to talk about some systems and ideas that can help you effectively work with your clients. Now, when we talk about effectively working together, there's 4 areas that we're going to dive into, and by the end of this session, by the end of all these 4 sessions, my goal for you is that you understand these 4 areas and how they can help you flourish as a freelancer or flourish as someone who is working with freelancers. So that first area is understanding our intentions. So why are we doing what we're doing? Why are we a freelancer? Why are we working with the types of clients we're doing? If we're a company, what's the motivation of why we're working with this freelancer? What are we trying to accomplish with the project that we're bringing them on? And really understanding our underlying motivations and having clear vision and direction for our project and how those underlying currents, whether we acknowledge them or not, actually affect the work that we're doing. The second area we're going to talk about is how we're going to engage. So we talk about communication, accountability, payment, compensation, the way we're compensated, whether it's hourly, fixed rate. Those things affect the working relationship, so it's best that we understand and address those at the beginning of the relationship. So again, the second area we want to address is how we're going to structure the engagement. The third area is how we're actually going to manage the projects that we're working on and the tasks that need to get done. We're going to dive into some a mindset that I bring to the table when I'm working with my company or with companies that hire me. I'm going to talk about a framework, a project management framework I use. We'll dive into a few tools, 2-way accountability, and some other ideas and thoughts on, again, how we're going to manage the projects and tasks that need to get done in order to accomplish our objectives. And those 3 areas, intentions, the structure of engagement, and how we're going to project manage, are going to lay a foundation for what's ultimately the 4th area, which is a sweet spot engagement. It's where we're working well together. We have value in the working relationship beyond the transaction of the project itself, the relationship, the type of work we're doing. And we're really cultivating just a type of engagement. As a freelancer, it's the client that I look forward to working with on their project. It's the company that, where you're looking forward to working with this particular freelance because of what they bring to the table. So we're going to dive into these 4 areas and really understand how freelancers and companies can work well together. All right, before we dive into the curriculum for this course, I want to give you a little bit of back history just about who I am, how I became an authority on freelancing, and how that connects the dots to why I'm speaking specifically on this topic of freelancers and companies working well together. Again, my name is Jason Scott Montoya. I'm a father of 4 children. I'm married. I've been freelancing for about 3 years now, full time. And it's been an exciting and wonderful journey, and I've really gotten to a place where I've done really well. I'm flourishing. I'm earning the amount of income that I set out to the clients I'm working with. I'm having a huge impact, and I, as a result, ended up writing a book called Path of the Freelancer. So I'm now an author on freelancing and how to do well at it. And so just to kind of rewind a little bit, how did I end up writing a book on freelancing? How did I end up freelancing full time? And how did I end up mastering it? Well, I moved to Atlanta in 2005 with my wife. We went on our honeymoon. The day we got back, we packed up everything and we moved from Arizona to Atlanta, Georgia, and lots there. But we had a lot of ambition and ideas. And one of the things that I ended up doing in 2007 was I launched a marketing company. And from 2007 to 2014, ran this company, learned a lot of lessons, made a lot of mistakes. At the end of that journey, decided to shut the company down. And so in 2014, in the spring, it was my last day. But I had connected with my network and really communicated to them what was going on, why I was doing what I was doing. And as a result of that process, I had several business leaders reach out to me and say, hey, before you go figure out what you're going to do next, can I contract you? Can I hire you as a freelancer to help me with my business and some of the challenges I'm facing? And I said, well, I don't know what I'm going to do next. I need to earn an income to provide for my family. So sure, let's do it. So I accepted it, and within a month or two, I had about 8 projects on my plate, and I had become a freelancer. In a way, it had sort of chosen me in sense, I hadn't sought out to become a freelancer, but the projects were there and it was paying, so I embraced it. Fast forward about 9 months, the projects didn't stop. They kept coming. I had learned some lessons along the way and really decided, you know what, I can make this work. I'm going to make this work, and I'm really going to lean in as a freelancer and master it. So 2015, spent that year really figuring out how to master it. And towards the end of that year, I had freelancers coming my way saying, hey, Jason, help me figure out how to overcome this problem as a freelancer or this challenge with this client. And I ended up coaching and mentoring several freelancers, and they said, you ought to write a book. I said, okay, I ought to write a book. I want to write a book. I'll write a book. This is the good one to write it on. Ended up starting the project Path of the Freelancer and writing that book. Recruited a dozen or so freelancers to go through on a monthly basis and coach them through the content and get their feedback to help make it better. And so went through that journey in 2016. At the end of that year, I'd finished writing the book and it was about to launch it and start the marketing. And at that time, I started actually the the demand for my services increased, and I had to start increasing my rates. And and as a result, I could only help so much with the time that I had, but I knew that the clients that I was working with needed a lot more help. So I started building these freelancing teams to help fill in the gaps, and I began project managing and leading these different teams for my clients to help them resolve their challenges and accomplish their marketing objectives. So I owned a marketing company. We hired freelancers both for our internal purposes, but also to help fulfill some of the services we sold to our clients. I really got to understand what it was like to be the company hiring the freelancer. On the flip side, I now become the freelancer, and then I started to build these teams. And so when you think about talking about how marketing companies and just different types of companies of all sorts can work well with freelancers, and freelancers working well with companies. I've got a 360 degrees perspective on the different roles and how they work and the different tensions, and I think I've come up with some really good ideas and systems that have helped me flourish and helped a lot of my clients flourish when it comes to working well with freelancers. And so I'm here today because I've been in the trenches. I've learned what it's like, and I've sort of documented and noted the things that worked and the things that didn't. And today or through this course, we're going to explore what those are and how they can help you. And we're going to start by diving into intentions. Why are we doing what we're doing? And what do we hope to accomplish by the end of that, in the end of our engagement, both as the freelancer and the company hiring one. So let's get at it. All right, so let's talk about intentions. Intentionality, interesting word. Motivation, it's another word we can use to describe it. Really understanding, I've come up with this cool concept. It's called the formula for intentionality, and I've included this graphic as one of the downloadable items. You can look in that, but essentially what I've done is I've defined what does it mean to be intentional. What does that look like? And I want to give you a few examples, and then I'll dive into the formula for intentionality to help you understand how it works and how it can actually help you out. So when I work with my clients, I have personal motivations that drive the boundaries, that drive the behaviors that I follow in terms of how I work with my clients. I have, like I mentioned before, I'm married, I have 4 kids, and so I have boundaries on when I'm going to work. I try and set some fences, so to speak, on my time, and so I'll work a 45-hour week, and my hours every day are from 9 to 6, or excuse me, from 8:30 a.m. to 6 p.m. with a little bit of time, a break in the middle there. And I'll do that Monday through Friday, and then after 6, unless except for an exception, or on the weekends, I'm not working. And so when I go into an engagement, when I'm working with a customer, and when we talk about how we're working together, that's going to be something that drives my behavior. If a client needs me to be available at evenings, if they need me to be available at weekends, it's going to be it's probably not going to be a good fit for us to work together, because I'm not going to be able to help them in that area. Another example of how my motivations affect my work is I've got a client who's building his business, and I'm continuing to freelance for him, as well as bring other freelancers into the fold and manage those for him. And one of the motivations that he has as a business owner is figuring out what type of business does he want to have. Over the last 2 years, we've almost doubled his revenues, and we've built up this business that creates a very nice, sustainable income, both for him, for the staff that he's brought on board, and the freelancers, both me and others that are working with him. And he could simply continue just to sustain that and live the lifestyle he wants, and pursue the things that he wants to do. That's option A, or option one. And option two is we actually have set the stage and built the foundation to build a scalable company where it's a hospitality company, but it's something where he could actually scale to other cities, other states, and even other countries, just in terms of how we've set up the systems. And so as a motivation or intention, what does he, as a business owner, where does he want to take his company? And as you can see, that's going to affect how I help him, how I market his company, how I help him build these systems and structures. And so his motivation is affecting that. On the flip side, I have my own personal aspirations. For me, I've written this book. Part of that step of writing Path of the Freelancer was to help me start the journey towards building a financially viable writing career. Ultimately, writing books, but to ultimately to end up writing screenplays and getting into the film and television industry on the creative and storytelling front. And so when I'm working with a customer, I know that I'm not going to be freelancing in the indefinite future. I know my time as a freelancer is going to be limited in terms of my rates are going to increase and my time and availability is going to decrease over time. So how can I set up my clients up for success so that when I move forward in my own journey, they're continuing to be taken care of and getting their goals accomplished? And so one of those things that I do is I build systems, I organize things, I keep them managed well and documented. I build teams to help them, and that allows me the comfort to know that, hey, when I've built this up for them and it's time for me to move on and I can replace myself, I've left them off better than when we started working together. And so that's how my personal motivation affects the business and the way that I work and the way they set it up. I go into an engagement with the end in mind before I even start, and part of that is driven by my aspirations to move forward in my own personal writing and writing projects. So that's a few examples of how that plays out. And I mentioned the formula for intentionality, so I'm going to go ahead and pull that up here. The formula for intentionality is composed of 4 elements. The first part is purpose. Why? As a freelancer, why am I freelancing? As a freelancer, why am I working with the types of clients that I'm working with? And really understanding purpose. So purpose is what pushes us, it propels us forward, it gives us sort of the energy and motivation to move, or to sort of get excited and passionate about something. So that's the first element. The second element is our mission. How are we going to go about it? As a freelancer, how am I going to go about freelancing? If you're a company and you're looking to work with a freelancer, how do you want to go about working with that freelancer? And that's something, again, we'll dive into in the second pillar in this course. But essentially understanding how, and how, we can break it down into a little bit more specifics in terms of what are our goals, what are the actions we're going to take, and what's the strategy, the sort of incubates those goals and actions that actually drive us towards sort of a larger picture, larger vision. And that's the third element, which is what's our vision? What does it look like when we've, as a freelancer, when we've arrived at the ideal destination, at the finish line of our vocation? What does it look like to succeed? What is success as a freelancer? And in companies, when you're looking to hire a freelancer and you're thinking, I want to hire a freelancer or to hire someone to help me with this challenge or this project or help resolve this situation, what does it look like when it's finished, when it's completely and perfectly, um, and not always, not that it's always perfect, but that we can sort of set a standard that we're striving to achieve. And then a fourth element in this whole formula is our guidelines, our values within sort of the guardrails that guide us along the way. Within what values, within what guidelines will we follow as we progress? I'll give you two examples. For me, I've got two core values. One is openness, and one is accountability. Those are two of my core values that guide my behavior and my activity, both in personal life as well as in my freelancing work. And so the openness means, I might have good ideas, I might know what we need to do to move forward, but I'm always going to be open to hear feedback and ideas, and especially when they are contrasting to mine, or if a client wants to go a direction I'm not inclined to go. I'm going to retain an open mind, be willing to speak my voice, but also be willing to hear and listen to others at the same time. Again, accountability is another one. When I make a mistake, I'm going to own it. And when others make a mistake, I'm going to also hold them accountable, although do it with grace and compassion as I approach them. And so we've got this formula for intentionality. So if as a company or as a freelancer, just start to ask yourself, why? Why am I doing what I'm doing? How do I want to go about it? What do I hope it accomplishes? Where does it lead us? And within what guidelines am I going to follow? And if we ask that both for our personal, professional, and the way that we want to work with someone, what we'll start to find is that by defining those and going into an engagement with those clearly defined and being able to clearly communicate that with our freelancer or freelancers with your client. So that's intentions. Again, both personal, professional, and company, and then figuring out how do we align those intentions. So the next area we're going to talk about is how we're going to structure our engagement. Let's get at it. All right, the second area when it comes to working well together for companies and freelancers is how we're going to structure the engagement. And when we're talking about how we're going to structure the engagement, a few things we need to consider is we need to have a way for accountability. We need to have a method for our communication. When is it going to happen? How is it going to happen? We need to understand, if we're going to work together, how do we start that process? And then what are the ways, how do we have a checkpoint system so that things continue to move along, but allows us to adjust and accommodate as needed? And so to help us explore those different pieces, I'm going to actually share the system I use when I'm working with clients. And part of the reason I designed the system the way I did is to address all of these things, to have the accountability, to have the check-in points, and to really provide a system that me as a former business owner could really latch onto, and me as a freelancer could really latch onto in terms of this is beneficial for both sides in a lot of really neat and powerful ways. So when I'm working with a customer or a prospect that comes to me and says, hey, I want to work together, there's really the first area that we're going to talk about is focus areas. There's two focus areas that I particularly work on, and that sort of just helps me to zone in or zoom into that area so I can start to ask them questions to understand what it is that they need. Sometimes I'll have a client that plays in both of these focus areas, but usually it'll be one or the other. And so the first focus area is working on the business. So it's coaching the CEO, it's talking and just having company strategic planning sessions. It might involve strategic planning for their marketing as well. And that brings me to the second focus area that I deal with is marketing and essentially external communications. How do we communicate with our customer, our prospects? How do we cultivate those relationships that for customers that are existing? How do we work with the team to more effectively communicate with the customers? and really help them on the marketing. So we got the business as one focus area, working on it, and then working on the marketing. And those are the two focus areas that I help with. Now, once we dive into one of those respective areas, then we've got a starting point. So what are the specific starting points that I can do to help my client? With the starting point, if a customer comes to me and they know specifically what they need, they say, hey, Jason, I need a Joomla website, which is one of the things that I can do from a tactical level. Or they come to me and say, Jason, I need help. Would you do some CEO coaching with me? So they come to the table, they know what they need, and they request it. And I'm essentially fulfilling their request. That's a starting point. But a lot of times a customer will come to me with a problem or a challenge and they don't know how to fix it. And that's where we'll come in and say, let's do an audit. Our starting point will be an audit, and I'll assess the situation and figure out what are the sort of the places that we can start after the audit to actually start to move forward and resolve some of these challenges. So we've got this starting point. And once we figured out the starting point, the next thing that we'll do is talk about, well, how are you going to compensate me? How am I going to communicate with you, and that sort of thing. And that's where really we talk about a system I've developed called BAM, which is Batch Action Management. And when you talk about compensation, BAM is actually built on an hourly model. Some freelancers like to charge a fixed fee, some like to charge hourly, some like to charge a mix, some like to charge in a completely different way. But based on my own kind of experience and journey, I've found that I really value time and I want to charge for my time. And this batch action management system is a great way to do that. So the way that I do it is I work in batches of 10 hours. My hourly rate is $85. So a client is committing to $850 for a batch. And during this batch, I'll pull up the graphic here and give you the graphic as a download. And in this graphic, you'll see in the circle, you've got the starting point, which you talked about, and then once we start the project, we start to work through that. And within maybe 3 or 4 hours of that 10-hour batch, I'll have a checkpoint, and I'll communicate with the customer saying, hey, here's what I've been working on, here's what's next. And it allows the customer, it gives them a steering wheel for my activity. It says, hey, you can come in and you can redirect my efforts, or you can change them if something new's come up or priorities have changed, or I'm going the wrong direction because I've misunderstood you. You can turn the steering wheel. And again, 7, 8 hours into the 10-hour batch, I'll check in again. Hey, here's what I'm doing. Here's what I'm up to next. Allows you to change gears or just reassure yourself that I'm working on the things and that I'm moving forward. At the end of the 10 hours, I do a cap. Essentially, I stop. And at that stopping point, I check in with you. I say, here's what I've done. Here's what I recommend we do next. And it acts as an on-off ramp to the highway. It says, you can continue working with me. We can change how we're working together. We can pause how we're working together. Or if you just want to stop working because this isn't working for you, then we can do that. And so it becomes this on-off ramp for my customers, allows them to really have a handle or a control over the type of work I'm doing, and just make sure that I'm moving in the right direction and I'm not going beyond what they're both financially or time-wise capable of processing. And so this system just works really well. There's 2 other pieces that come into play for the clients that I end up working with in an ongoing capacity, or actually 3. For certain projects that are sort of a fixed project, maybe it's a certain marketing project or a website or some sort of written content type of project. I'll let a client know up front, I estimate this could take 2.5 batches, or it could take 10 batches, or whatever it might be. That way they have an idea of what the larger spend's going to be, and then I'll update them along the way and say, hey, we're moving along, and by the way, we're ahead of schedule or we're behind. So if you want to stick to that budget, we're going to have to pull out these things from the budget to maintain your goal. And the other thing is, if I'm working in an ongoing capacity, another thing I'll do is we'll determine a pace of the number of batches that we're going to do in a particular period of time. So it might be, for some of my clients, it might be 5 batches a month. For others, it might be 1 batch a month. For others, it might be 2. For some, it might be once a quarter, or some, it might be once a year. But whatever it is will determine what that pace is, and that allows me to have sort of a larger range. And so if I'm doing 5 batches per month, when I hit the end of the 10 hours, that 10 hour just becomes a communication checkpoint instead of a cap. And the cap now moves to the end of that 5 hours. So the batch now becomes a 50-hour batch with communication checkpoints along the way, and the cap happening at the end of that 50 hours if that's the pace that we've set. And then if there's an overarching budget, sometimes a client might say, hey, I can do this number of batches per month, and but here's the overall budget. And that allows me to understand how to pace it in terms of, sometimes I'll have a client that says, hey, you can just do the batches as quickly as you can and don't worry about throttling it so that you can span a period of time. So I might, if I've got a client that wants to have me do 2 batches in a month, I could just knock those out in the first or second week and get it. In other cases, I might have to throttle that over the course of the month or a few months. I mean, the pace, the overarching budget, and then also the pace, the overarching budget. So, BAM system, we've got our starting point, our communication checkpoints, our stopping points. We've got our pace and our overall budget. All of these pieces create communication. They create accountability. They create checkpoints. They give the client a steering wheel, and they allow our client to really have control over the type of work we're doing and the direction we're moving. And what I found is this just gives them significant reassurance and working well together. In fact, I've had clients that love the system so much that they have their other freelancers adopt the same model. And it's been a pretty phenomenal way to approach things. Also, if you ever run into clients that tend to be more micromanagers or hands-on, this system has a way of giving you a bit of a bubble to work within, because they understand that you're managing yourself, you're holding yourself accountable, and they're not as engaged. And so it really does help in that regard as well. So we've talked about how we're going to structure the engagement in terms of compensation, accountability, communication. Now let's talk about how we're actually going to manage the project and the ideas that come to the surface and how we can do that effectively. All right, let's talk about managing, or how we're going to manage our projects. Let's start with one of the things that when I go to work with a client, I bring this mindset into the clients I'm working with, and it's called SOFI, S-O-F-I. And what it stands for is Seeking Opportunities for Improvement. Seeking Opportunities for Improvement, SOFI. So SOFI is a framework, or it's a system, but it's really a mindset that I bring in, that whatever our starting point is, whatever the project that we're doing is, I'm going into this engagement and I'm looking for opportunities for improvement. I'm looking for problems, I'm looking for challenges, I'm looking for ways that I can improve their business, both in the area that they've designated and outside of that. And so one of the obvious sort of challenges that comes up for me is, well, how do I organize that, as well as the other stuff that we're working on together, so that we can capture it and make sure that we're moving things forward that we need to be moving forward, but also building a set of obstacles, or opportunities to work on in the future. And so in the marketing company journey that I mentioned earlier, one of the things that came out of that process was a system called IDEMA, I-D-E-M-A, and it's an acronym that stands, I stands for ideate, D stands for discover, E stands for execute, M stands for maintain, A stands for audit. And essentially it's a cyclical process for the life cycle of every idea, every project. So we ideate, we come with an idea, we discover, we plan out that idea, Once we've planned it out, then we have to actually execute it. Once we've executed it, then we need to maintain it, sustain it over time, and at some point we need to audit it, make sure it's still doing what it was intended to do, and see if we need to improve it or not, retire it, or continue allowing it to play out the way it needs to play out. And so this IDEMA system framework allows us to start to capture ideas and figure out where they belong in this process. So as I'm working with the customer, I might see something that goes, you know what, we need to audit that, and I've got I need to have a bucket where I can put all the audit things in. And just as an example of sort of how this plays out in terms of going into an existing situation and figuring out how to apply IDEMA, I think about my kids. My kids, like I mentioned, I got 4 of them, 7, 6, 3, and 1. And their rooms can get messy, as you can imagine. So one of the things we'll do is we'll get everything in the room and just put it in a big pile in the middle. And then we've got different buckets or containers for the different types of toys and the different types of things. So we might have a stuffed animal bin, a Lego bin, and so we'll go into the pile and we'll say, let's get all the stuffed animals and put them into the stuffed animal bin. Let's get all the Legos and put them into the Lego bin. Let's put all of the garbage into the trash can. Let's put all of the clothes into either the hamper or the dresser, depending on if they're clean or not. And in the same way, when I go into a business, I'm thinking, okay, I see all of these ideas. We need to actually just capture them and plug them into an idea repository. I see all these projects that were started but they weren't finished, so we need to plug all those into sort of an execution list of things that need to be finished. And so that's really where our project management tool comes in, is so what's the tool that we can use that we can actually start to use this IDEMA structure and then within our tool. And so one of the tools I'll use is Airtable. Airtable it's essentially a database tool that allows you to use it in different ways. You can use it as a sort of a spreadsheet view. You can use it in a Kanban view. You got a gallery view, and then there's a couple other options as well. You can also use Trello, which is a simple Kanban board, and you can create different lists. So with whatever system that you'll use, and I use both of those depending on the context, but I'll essentially create a category for each letter, IDEMA, and as I'm working with the customer, I'll start to plug in the different items in the particular area that they exist in. And then when I'm project managing, I know, okay, this is something that's being planned out. We need to finish planning it. This is something that's being maintained. We need to we need to audit it at some point. And so we'll kind of dive into these different tools and explore, okay, how does this work with this particular client? And each system is a little bit, modified. And the beauty of IDEMA is that it really is customizable to work and be shaped in the way that we need it for the particular project. So I go into a project with the seeking opportunities for improvement. I use this framework, IDEMA, in order how I'm going to organize it, and then I've got a project tool such as Airtable or Trello that I plug in the different elements of IDEMA, and then allows me to start to manage my project and make sure things are moving through that cycle. By having that mindset, by having that framework, and by having that project tool, it now allows for two-way accountability. We can see what's being worked on, who's responsible for it, and it allows me to be held accountable if I'm falling behind or if I'm dropping the ball, or allows me to hold others accountable if they're doing the same thing. And ultimately, by having that process and then marrying that with the batch action management communication cadence, it really creates this automatically self-healing system that's always correcting, always improving, always getting better, and moving things forward, moving things in a direction that really helps accomplish the goals more effectively, brings the team along, and really just does a wonderful job getting everyone on the same page. So that two-way accountability is just amazing. The other thing, that to keep in mind when you're thinking about, these frameworks and these systems, and they are great and they work really well, is just to be willing to adapt and accommodate. The systems, sometimes they break, sometimes there's things that don't really fit, there's exceptions to the rules, and being willing to just be flexible in those situations. And sometimes, I have to choose to lose sometimes in order to win in the larger game. And so just be willing to, adapt and accommodate, even sometimes when it's not the most pleasant thing to do. When we do that, we've laid the foundation for a sweet spot relationship. So let's dive into what that looks like. All right, let's dive into what does it mean to have a sweet spot engagement, to have a relationship or a working relationship with a freelancer, or a freelancer to have a working relationship with. All right, so let's go ahead and wrap up these 4 points and just briefly summarize what we've hit. We've talked about these 4 powerful ways that we can effectively, if we're companies, effectively work with freelancers. And if we're freelancers, we can effectively work with companies. The first is understanding our intentions, both as a freelancer and as a company. Why are we doing what we're doing? How do we want to do it? Where does it take us? What is it, in other words, what does it look like when we've arrived, and within what guidelines are we going to operate? And we're going to think about those at a personal level, a professional level, and in the engagement itself. So why are we engaging with this freelancer, or vice versa? So we're understanding our intentions and how those currents affect our behavior, how they affect the relationship, and how we can actually learn to create alignment and actually leverage that energy to springboard each other towards our respective objectives. We also talked about how we're going to work together in terms of structuring the engagement. We're going to have some sort of accountability, some sort of communication checkpoints. We're going to have some ways to have these on and off ramps to be able to change and adjust things and alter it, and have a fair compensation system. So when we're used more, we're compensated more. When we're used less, we're compensated less. We're going to have this essentially powerful system to just structure how we're working, knowing where we're going to get started, how we're going to stay on track and move forward. And then we talked about the BAM, the batch action management system, as a model that you could use to either essentially duplicate yourself or create some sort of variation of that based on your own needs. The third area we talked about is understanding and having a system for how we're going to actually manage the project. So I talked about going into my projects with a SoFi mentality, seeking opportunities for improvement, and going into these projects looking for ways that I can be of help and how I can improve their business beyond the specific things they've asked. So having an eye for problems so that I can help fix those. And so we talked about that. We talked about IDEMA, IDEMA, ideate, discover, execute, maintain, and audit. And as a system, it's a framework that we can use to capture ideas and to project manage well, and then use a tool such as Trello or Airtable to actually input those ideas and track them and document them, and have that two-way accountability, and be willing to adapt and accommodate based on the situations that arise. And then we talked about having a sweet spot relationship where we're proactive and responsive in communication, where we have accurate and prompt billing and payments. And we talked about having a valuable relationship, a valuable work, and having just building value outside of the transaction of the work itself. And finally, we talked about, and in the context of building a sweet spot relationship, just advocating for each other, freelancers advocating for companies, companies advocating for freelancers, and really helping each other grow and succeed in our respective paths. So those are the 4 areas that I've really found that have helped me. They've helped my clients. They've helped us really well together. I've built teams, these marketing freelance teams for my clients, and we've operated with these sort of fundamental pieces in some of these examples that I've given you. And if you proactively engage in them, you understand what people are trying to accomplish and where they're trying to go, it makes a big difference. They feel cared for, and they really do what they can to meet and exceed your expectations. And I really think these pillars can help you as you explore working together with freelancers. So I've prepared a lot of resources. I've got some of the graphics, the deck that goes through the different pieces that we've talked about, and some written content to sort of reiterate some of what I've said and add some details that I may have missed here in this course. And by now you should have some good ideas on how you can work well together going forward. So go do it, have fun, and feel free to ask any questions that you have.